This column is simple, writes Mike Freeman in the Bleacher Report today. I spoke with 4 Seattle players this week, meaning the Seahawks, and they made something clear, stating their thoughts without malice. All 4 of them, each veterans, made one poignant statement. It's worse than you know. Mike Freeman joins us here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you, Mike?
First of all, I would say you look beautiful in 4G, Rich.
Thank you. Well, I sound better in 4G.
You know?
It's 4K. It's 4K. The way I look right now.
Don't sell yourself short. Come on, man.
Hey, did you see Shatner here on the show last week, Mike?
Of course I did. I watched it like 5 times.
It's just, I tried to get him to do his beatnik singing. He was not up for it.
No.
Yeah, try to get him to do the Michigan fight song, "Fly Eagles Fly," and take me out to the ball game. I wish he could have.
The beatnik singing is not his finest moment.
The Transformed Man is one of the greatest albums of all time, Mike. Let's talk about this Seattle locker room. It's worse than you know, huh? Give us the broad strokes of what you learned this week.
Well, the main thing, Rich, is just how that locker room seems to just be fine with all this stuff. They just sort of, it's how they roll. It's a lot of, as you know those guys. It's a lot of strong personalities, and they seem to. I got some pushback on if they thrive on it. It's not that they thrive on it. It's just that it's like baked into what they do. So it's just sort of, there's divisions and there's some bitterness with some guys, but most of the guys there just sort of accept it and they have their arguments and they move on. And the it's worse than you know part was more. There's more arguments than you know about, more division than you know about.
Well, between who? Between who? Offense and defense?
Offense and defense. Offense and defense. And the main thing was that the story by Seth was accurate, was pretty dead on. There was just disagreement about how much it matters. And that's where I think a lot of this goes and where it's been and where it's going to go next. How much does all this division between offense and defense matter? And Seth's story was really good and really dead on, but a lot of players will say, yeah, okay, yeah, all right, that's so what? We just go on, we play. We don't. Some of us don't like each other. Some of us are still mad about what happened. Some of us don't like the play calling in the Super Bowl, our last play. Some more than others. But most of us just sort of go on and just this is how it is.
And that's what I said in the segment before, and I say all the time, and covering the NFL as long as you do, is that this is good stuff to talk about in June, May, April, when there's no games of which to speak. And the idea is, like, what does it matter? How will it manifest itself in wins and losses? And in that regard, I remember on Thursday Night Football, and this was brought up in the Seth Wickersham article that ESPN, the magazine, published that you're referring to, on that Week 15 game. We're there, and the Rams had just fired Jeff Fisher, and there's John Fossil coaching the Rams in an interim style, and the Seahawks are having, their usual somewhat plotting manner in which they're trying to beat the Rams. And then Russell Wilson almost gets picked off on the 1-yard line, and Richard Sherman brought it all back up again. And we looked at each other, Irvin and me and Marshall, and we're like, this is still there. This is still there. And that is how it manifests itself. Here we are in a playoff drive in December. Maybe, just maybe, this is the sort of stuff that lingers and does prevent some cohesion. Mike, is that true?
Yeah. I think there's some of that. The quote that sort of stood out to me in talking to some of these guys was how one guy said it's like being in a workplace where one department has constant friction with another, but they put out the best laptops in the world. And that's sort of how it does. What you just described is true. I mean, it can have an effect, but they still manage to put out this great product. I guess the ultimate question is how much effect does this stuff have? Does it actually translate on the field? You just gave a great example of how it can. And I think, when you read Seth's article and some of the reporting I've done recently and in the past, a lot of the bitterness is, it is centered on Richard. They will deny this publicly vehemently, but when you talk to players privately, I mean, I got texts from guys saying, yeah, it's what I wrote was true or Seth wrote was true. They will accept it privately that Richard is really particularly angry about that play and some of the things with Russell Wilson. And so there's stuff there, and it can manifest itself. But I think the question is how much? What does it do? This is one of the most intellectual, really highly intelligent locker rooms I've ever been around. You know, you've been around a lot of locker rooms yourself and seen a lot of things and seen a lot of players, and you know how some guys get it, some guys don't, and some guys are really smart and sharp and just understand. This Seattle locker room is like they are a bunch of smart dudes, not just on the field but off the field, and they're strong-willed. So all these things come into this volatile mix that can just sort of boil over at times.
Well, it's a lot of Stanford in that locker room. Mike Freeman joining me here on the Rich Eisen show. So let's stop dancing. I know. Let's stop dancing around it. How much of this is the fact that Russell Wilson isn't putting enough points up on the board, and the defense feels that their best days are passing by, while Russell Wilson isn't held to account in a way that other guys are on the team? That's essentially it, right?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And I mean, to me, I don't know how you feel about this. Being quarterback, there's already just a lot of accountability, so sort of just baked into it, just sort of put into it. So I don't know how much I agree with that sentiment, but that's the core of it. Like there's no question. That's the core of it. There's just they will tell you, they will say, like, I think it was Michael Bennett that came out and said, I was just at a barbecue with Russell.
Yep.
Right? And so you will get that publicly. Privately, it's different. There's not a connection, and they feel like that offense and particularly Russell are held to a different standard than that defense. But you know what? I mean, cry me a river. That defense is special. So I'm a huge Russell Wilson guy. Sometimes I'm accused of being too much of a Russell Wilson guy. I'm a huge Russell Wilson guy. But that defense is special, so it's going to be held more accountable. That's just the way it is. It's just so many talented guys on that side of the ball and not as many on the offense. So, of course, they're going to be held to a higher standard. Of course, more weight is going to be put on their shoulders. That's just how it works in football. So I don't know why I kind of know why, but there's just so much – there's too much finger-pointing at Russell Wilson from a defense that is going to be held accountable because they're so good.
Well, I mean, in that regard, Mike Freeman of the Bleacher Report joining me here. When we were all at the draft, we were hearing whispers that the Seahawks, don't be surprised if they take a quarterback in the draft. And they didn't. Now, I'm just wondering if that stuff is put out there to try and quell anybody in that locker room thinking that Wilson isn't being held to the same always compete mantra that he is the personification of, right? That Pete Carroll gives anybody a shot if they have the ability. He's done countless times, and Wilson's a personification of that. And the interesting aspect of this, Mike, is the guy who could, in a way, be brought in to bring that to bear is Kaepernick. How much of a there is there with that?
Well, with Russell, as you know how it works. Leaks are purposeful; they're not accidental. So when you hear stuff about that, that's not by accident, and it's also not the media making stuff up. Some of that stuff is purposeful, but Kaepernick, to me, would be just. I mean, this is not a more perfect situation than him going to Seattle. Excuse me. It would be absolutely spot on, perfect. I think I told you before I wasn't sure if I bought it, and that also, that locker room, the guys on defense there love Kaepernick. I mean, in conversations talking to some of those guys this week, they talked about him a lot. They really respect him. They've gone against him, some of them. And in general, Kaepernick, I don't know if people understand this. Is a quick aside. And throughout the league, on the defensive side of the ball, guys who have gone against Kaepernick really, really respect him as a guy and as a player, in part because a lot of times he just tore him up. He would just do some amazing stuff. People kind of forget about that. But also there's a lot of guys that like what he's doing, Kaepernick, with what he did, with his stand. So that Seahawks team is the same way. They have a lot of respect for him. They would love to see him there. Why it hasn't happened yet, Rich, I don't know.
And then again, I mean, Russell Wilson is a special quarterback. You know, I mean, he can do so many things that so many people can't. And I'm just wondering, you know, you remember this may not be an appropriate analogy, but you remember like the 70s Yankees where there was so much crap going on, but they won, or the A's of the early 70s, or, you know.
It's actually a perfect analogy.
You know.
It's pretty good.
Where these guys may not realize how good they actually have it, and yet they win despite it because they got the right guy at the helm and they got the right people at the locker room for the very moment that they need it. When it all comes down to it, though, Mike, I mean, don't you think that they're a Super Bowl contender coming up this fall?
Yes. Yeah, every year. I mean, as long as that – I mean, the defense is getting older, but it's still a talented, great group of players. And I'm just a big Russell Wilson guy. I think he's very underrated and underappreciated, even on his own team in some spots. So, they're a Super Bowl contender. I mean, every year they're going to be this way for the next 2 or 3 years. The interesting part will be to watch what this team does with Richard Sherman. And so far, they've sort of kind of let this stuff go and worked it out. But that defense makes them formidable every year, and Russell Wilson makes them formidable every year. So every year, when those two things are still in there, they're going to be tough team to beat.
They certainly looked great in New England on Sunday Night Football earlier this year. Or last year. I mean, they're a fascinating team. Live long and prosper, Mike Freeman. Thanks for calling in.
No, Rich, you live long and prosper.
Thank you, sir. You got it. That's Mike Freeman of the Bleacher Report here on The Rich Eisen Show.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on radio stations across the country and audience.
If you like that, please download our app. There's lots of fun things there other than just more of the videos you just saw. You can call us from the app. You can email us from the app. Just download it. Trust me, you'll enjoy it.